And it was this allegory that was given to me by a black man in Dallas County Jail, a black man who I still can't find to this day, went by the name Muhammad.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I can't find him to this day, but he gives me this allegory to send me on my way into this prison system that he thinks is probably going to devour me, because that's what it does to most people, because he's telling me about the racial factor in there and what I'm up against. I want to be an independent, but I'm going to have to fight the white gangs and the black gangs. And, the life in this building where I'm going is one of the toughest parts of prison. And he was right about all that. I mean, he was right about everything.
Your book, The Change Agent. I haven't read The Coffee Bean yet, but I've read The Change Agent, and almost twice now, because I was trying to, listen to it again to generate some interesting questions.
That excites me, man. I appreciate you doing that, Brandon. That's going to make for a much more informed interview. This is exciting.
The way you wrote about prison was very intriguing to me, because we just had different life trajectories, leading up to prison. And so that's one of the questions I wanted to ask is, when you were growing up, what were some of the images or stereotypes or ideas you had about people who went to prison? Oh, man. I mean, look, I grew up white, middle class, well-educated, had all the opportunities, all the privilege, because I was a very privileged person, Brandon. I grew up privileged. My idea of someone that went to prison was a lower class person, right? I mean, that's what, from my little bubble of the world, what I would view. I mean, a white person goes to prison, probably white trash, that kind of thing. In fact, go back to the first time I see meth, my little brother is the one doing it. We're living in Austin. And I immediately looked down on him. It's like, what are you doing with this white trash drug? But I'm a cocaine addict at the time. Which was odd.
I'm sitting there talking about his drug of choice as being meth as a white trash thing. So I have all these prejudices, because we all have prejudices. And my prejudice of an incarcerated person was someone of a lower class. I didn't even take into account the fact that, anybody could be caught up in the system, that, because addiction is such a big factor that I learned in prison.
Yeah.
My own prison experience. There were about 5 factors that I found, this is kind of leaping forward maybe a little bit, but when I was incarcerated, there were about 5 variables that I saw around the people I was incarcerated with. And I was a sociology major as my bachelor's. My bachelor's was in sociology. I graduated in 99 from North Texas. So 10 years later, when I first darkened a prison, you start paying attention to the variables, and the lack of education is one. Poverty, lack of a family, family unit, race, and substance abuse. And really, I was an outlier for 4 of those, because, lack of education, didn't have to worry about that. Poverty, that wasn't me. Lack of family, that wasn't me either. My parents just celebrated 53 years being married. I came from a complete home, Race, I'm a white guy in America, It's just not the normal path that I'm going to see going down. But substance abuse, man, that was the one. And that's how I ultimately ended up inside of a maximum security prison.
Yeah, it was interesting when you talked about the difference, the way you viewed meth versus your coke addiction. And on the other side, we in the past would look at crack as like a black American drug, and powder is the white middle class, and then meth is, the white trash or the hillbillies. But the addiction and the way that it grips people, we all have similar stories to tell about how it leads us down these paths of irrationality and arrogance. You mentioned being cocky and arrogant, thinking only about yourself, and sort of the demented way that you thought. But that was interesting. The way that you wrote the book was you talked about, or you looked at certain things that, for example, in my life, I hadn't thought about its distinctiveness, talking about laundry turnout and the schedules and getting mail and all these different distinctives.
Taking a crap. It's just like,
you emphasized that, and I was like, that's awkward, but I mean, it's just one of those things like doing the line and all that sort of thing.
Right. Well, drop one, drown one. You got to keep that toilet water moving. But people that have never been inside there, you and I have been inside this world. People's biggest fear in life that I've found, for the most part, Brandon, people's biggest fear in life is going to prison.
Yeah.
And we've been in there.
Yeah.
So now we're telling it. We've got this ability to articulate what we saw and heard and experienced in there. And if we could come out and tell those stories, that sheds some light on a world that is just unknown to a lot of people. So people have reached out to me there in the nuance that you're talking about, the laundry, the mail, going to the bathroom.
Yeah.
People grabbed onto that because they're like, oh man, that was a visual of a world I don't know nothing about.
Yeah. And it was commendable throughout the book. Not only were you real about some of those sort of raw topics, but you also were acknowledging internal struggles yourself about how you viewed people and being judgmental, and then trying to clean that up and, habituate yourself to not see people that way.
Sure.
So all of those things were just really intriguing to me. So just as much as, I was interested in how you understood people who were incarcerated, or what kind of people went to prison, and then you end up there. What was it like in there for you to continue your education? Because you had already come in there, again, in a different way than others. You already had a college education, but you did talk about how you would read a book every other day or so, and you stayed reading, you stayed in the law library. So in your pursuit of education while you were there, what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a very good question because, again, education being key to changing your circumstances in life, I found that the more I read, the better I wrote. And so I started writing The Change Agent. It was 2011 after this guy named David Puckett had escaped from SEG, man. This guy got out of SEG. He was gone for like 5 days. But the lockdown was like 40 days. And that's when I sit down and start writing. And it's the first time I ever really sat down and wrote something other than letters. And I found out that I was a better writer than I'd ever been in my life. But I've been pumping these books in constantly, reading a book every other day. I found out that it made me a better writer just by reading. It made me a better writer. So I wanted to read more and I wanted to write more, and this was the furthering of my education because I had a bachelor's degree already. They wouldn't let me take any classes. Not only that, but I was a G3. And being classified as a G3 in TDCJ, that means you have 50 years or more. And when you have 50 years or more, they segregate you when you get into the system.
Eligible for anything.
Can't go to school, can't have a job. These are the things that you're limited. You're basically just sit on a pod if you're non-aggravated for 5 years, if you're aggravated for up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So there I am sitting away on this cell. The only way I can get off is to go to chow, the rec yard, the mailroom, or the law library, or the chapel. So I'll find ways to get off the pod to go do the things I can, law library. But in the chapel, I would say is where I furthered a lot of my education because in the chapel, I got to be exposed to, first of all, it's a captive audience. It's one thing about prison. It's a very captive audience. So in the chapel, I'm exposed to more of my Catholic faith, but other faiths too. I get to sit in, I get to go and take Buddhist classes, and I get to meditate and do yoga and stuff like that. I get exposed to that. But I get around the Muslims and I get to know their Jummah services and Talim, and then I get around, get to learn more about the Jewish faith from the guys that are Jewish in there and going through their Jewish services around Passover. But one of the things I learned in education in prison is that your education is largely what you want it to be, and that can be from your cell, it can be anywhere. Every time I had a new cellmate, I looked at it as an opportunity. What can I learn from this person? Because you're going to stick someone in the cell with me. I'm going to spend more of my time inside the cell with that person than anybody else. So one of the things I did when I had a Hispanic cellmate that he spoke mostly Spanish, I started learning my Spanish, started sharpening up my Spanish. So we're going to listen to his radio station in there. And, he's asking me, is it okay if my radio is loud? I'm like, yes, let it be loud. I want to be immersed in this.
Yep.
Then I get a cellmate that's Muslim. And so he's making salat. He's making his prayers 5 times a day. So I'm going to pray the same time he's praying, but I'm going to ask him questions. Hey, teach me about this, about your faith. Can I read your Quran? So that's what I did to educate myself, man. And I read everything I could, Brandon. I read about history of world religions. I read biographies, fiction, nonfiction. But learning about the 5 major world religions was a very big deal for me. It's Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And at the core of all 5 of those religions were these 4 spiritual principles: unselfish, honest, pure, and loving. And when I was first introduced to these 4 spiritual principles of unselfish, honest, pure, and loving was in an AA meeting inside that prison. These are what they call the 4 absolutes in the big book of AA.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of my studying came in, because I got into recovery and I started learning more. I'm kind of the person, Brandon, and you're the same way. I'm sure that once you put your teeth into something, you're going to get this done. Yeah. There's rarely a task that I go out and try to accomplish that I don't get it done. And becoming the best version of myself inside that prison was one of those things, and that was through education.
Yeah, and it's so cool that most of your education, at least what you just told me, was dominantly about religious studies and trying to understand different ways people understood the meaning of life and the purpose of life. I did something very similar. I was in, you mentioned being in correspondence courses. I was in dozens of Buddhist correspondence and Hindu, and I was had a Islamic correspondence in Saudi Arabia. I had this Spanish celly, and he would help me write letters to my girlfriend's family in Spanish. It was a very similar track because I wanted to just become educated, and comparative world religion is just where I started in like January of 2001, and it ended up lasting like 10 or 15 years of just being immersed in world religion. Because through that, you learn philosophy, you learn psychology, and you end up learning sociological principles that are applicable today through ancient wisdom.
Absolutely. What motivates people? Because now if you understand people's faith, you understand what motivates them. What are the breaks that they have on their sociological conditioning? What's the ceiling to it? Is there a ceiling to it? But yeah, understanding religion is understanding people.
And it goes a long way to establishing good relationships with them, because it is as if you understand a core part of who they are, because you understand what they believe and what they've committed themselves to.
Sure.
That being the case, what do you think of in terms of prison reform, types of programming and things that go on within the prisons, like cognitive intervention or the alcohol or AA, NA, all the different programming, Voyager and Quest for Authentic Manhood and all these different programs? What role or how valuable do you think education plays a role in prison reform? Oh,
I think it's one of the biggest roles, because you've got an audience. I use the term captive audience about myself. You've got a captive audience. You've got people there that are going to be there for a set amount of time, but you've got to fill that time up with something. You know the old saying, do your time, don't let your time do you, right? So how do you do your time the right way? And education, to me, is key. Now, the curriculum inside of a prison, I can only speak about a Texas prison system. I took everything, right? I went down. I couldn't take any college classes, but I got into all the Wyndham stuff I could.
Yeah.
The best class by far that I ever took in prison was cognitive intervention. Brandon, to this day, and you probably don't say, I still use thinking reports in my head. If this, then what? That stuff was valuable to me. There's some stuff in cognitive intervention that I learned, like I said, I still use every day. But my personal opinion about some of the curriculum programming in TDCJ, because that's where I did my time, is antiquated. It was to me, it's antiquated. It's not all useful. And I'm not going to call out the programs that I'm talking about, because I don't want to put a taint on them. But it was what inspired me, what pushed me to develop my own prison curriculum, which is now ready and available and is going to be piloted in Texas prisons, along with a research component, everything. A researcher from the University of Houston downtown where I work is going to be doing the research on it. But I think that I want to find out from this curriculum that I've built, that what effect does it have on behavior, on the way people see themselves, about relationships. I believe there's a triangle, Brandon, in prison. That if we're going to really talk about change in prison reform, is what I call the triangle. And at each point of the triangle is a different group. We'll say the top of the triangle is the offender, the currently incarcerated person. This point of the triangle over here, we'll say, is the correctional officer. And this point over here is the family member. And if we're going to change the culture, we're going to change the culture inside of prison. And culture, I think culture is a top-down thing. It has to come directed from the top up. Whoever is at the top of whoever's at the top of the system sets the culture. Mm-hmm. But it has to be bought in from the bottom up. The correctional officers, the inmates, the family members, everybody has to buy into this culture. I do believe we're at a point right now where we can change the culture, but we're going to have to change all three of those points. We're going to have to introduce them to a new way of thinking. And that's what my curriculum is trying to do. Because I think for a long time we've said in prison that, hey, we'll have these classes available and that's our best answer, that's our best solution. I'll go a little deeper. I went to the FI5 program, the in-prison therapeutic community. There are a lot of things that I think could be changed to make the IPTC better. Now, whether or not TDCJ would want to listen to those suggestions and do that, but I know I can improve the IPTC. I know that right now they're saying the recidivism numbers are good, so they're probably not even open to that. But I know some ways to make it better because I went through it.
In all of that, then, is there particular kind of education or curriculum or content that you think is more valuable than others? So you did mention about cognitive intervention. That was an important class for me as well. And speaking of which, I was in that class during 9/11. We had an old veteran who was our teacher, and they drug in the TVs and we watched it. I was in that class at that moment, so it was very valuable to me. But in terms of content or the kind of education that's available, which do you see would be the most valuable? And so I mean this in this sense. So there's a ton of vocation, right? There's a ton of craft, tradesmen, or what they would call career technical educational programs. There's limited academic college sort of classes, but then they also have therapeutic classes. Among all of it, what do you think is some of the most valuable?
I think some of the most valuable is the kind that's probably not being offered at a big rate right now, and that's life skills type stuff. I think life skills curriculum is probably more important than anything, because you're talking about a population. First of all, let's talk about, so writing a prison curriculum, I just did it. You're talking about writing a curriculum that you really deal between the 6th and 9th grade reading level, because that's what a lot of your population is going to be. So you got to create a curriculum that appeals to them, that they can speak to them, that didn't go over their head. The last thing you want to do is lose them. But life skills, when I'm talking about life skills, it's how to deal with life on life's terms, and that's the kind of skills that are necessary. That, for example, when we know that someone's going to be getting out of prison, we know that someone's on the path to get out, because 95% of the people that are incarcerated will get out one day. That's what we know about corrections. We need to educate these people that are going to get out, these people that are going to be formally incarcerated, on things like balancing a checkbook, how to do a job interview. These are the soft skills, these social skills that I don't think are being taught there. How to work a computer, how to work the Microsoft Office, suite, how to do that. These are skills that are so important that they're going to have to know how to do, that maybe no one's ever sat down and taught them, or maybe they never learned, But I think these are some of the skills that need to be taught inside of a prison right now that aren't necessarily being taught. But the skills that I think are available right now that need to be pressed on even further are skills that deal with changing yourself, working on that core of who you are. And that means it's a spiritual, conditioning, it's a mental conditioning, it's a physical conditioning. But this is a curriculum of life that needs to be taught inside the prison system that allows people and gives them the tools to work with. I think if you can build a curriculum, which is what I try to do, and incorporate some of the guidance from the 12 steps that I learned in AA, I think if you can build some of that stuff in. Listen, I think the 12 steps should be something that every human being works. I think every human being by the age of 7 should work the 12 steps, because it gives you a way of life, a way of working your personal inventory, a way of becoming accountable again. So I think that curriculum that teaches soft skills, social skills, is the most important.
I agree. And I don't say that because we're just here. That was what my dissertation was more or less about. I referred to it as intellectual character, those traits that enable you to be a good thinker. Mm-hmm. So intellectual humility, owning up when you're ignorant or don't understand, and then open-mindedness, being willing to learn from somebody else. But I call it character education. But in economic research, they refer to it as soft skills. In psychological research, it'll be personality traits. Mm. But to my mind, all of them fit under the umbrella of what would be called non-cognitive qualities, which would include social and emotional learning, soft skills, all of that. So that is something that I think is really important that is lacking there. You might pick that up in maybe changes. You'll pick some of it up in cognitive intervention classes. You'll pick some of it up in AA. You'll pick some of it up in the religious classes. But to my mind, there's nothing that zeroes in on some of those things very particularly and says, what is it? How do you develop it? Why is it important? And starts from that path. So,
but I'll add on to that. What I think also was missing here, Brandon, is this isn't a class that you take when you're getting ready to get out necessarily. This is the class you take when you get in.
Yes.
Because the successful reentry, as we know, begins the day you walk in those doors of that prison. Now that I'm here, give me the tools that I need to change my life, because now I can work on myself. It was like these guys I was locked up with, Brandon. And I mean, I'm getting ready to go out to the rec yard sometimes, and I see these guys. They're just massive, obese, morbidly obese guys. And I'm like, dude, come out to the rec yard with me today. I won't even, because I jogged a lot in prison. I won't jog today. I'll walk the track with you, man. Just come walk the track with me a little bit. Let's get your body moving. Same answer every time. Oh, no, Wes, man, no, I'm not worried about, man. When I get out, I'm going to get a gym membership. And no, you're not. You're not going to do that when you get out because life's going to hit you in the mouth, man. Yes. Life is fast. Life is moving when you walk out of prison. But here these guys are saying, I'm going to get a gym membership. You're 400 pounds. No, if you don't do it while you're in there, you have all that time on your hands, you're never going to do it, man. Because that was like my cellmate, Carlos, man. Carlos was telling me that, man, you have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to work on yourself. This is when I first got to prison, man. Yeah. This is like the indoctrination when you get in. You have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to become the best version of yourself possible. And he asked me, what are you prepared to do with this opportunity? He looked at prison as an opportunity, right? But we need to show people when they walk in the door of prison, here is your opportunity. Here's your manual to your opportunity. Yeah, that's what I want my curriculum to be on the front end.
Yeah, that is a talking point I include in all of my reentry presentations, and I use the gym as an example. I'm like, I hear people tell me I'm going to wait till I get out to go to the gym to get my education, to get this, that, and the other, to stop drinking or whatever. And I'm like, no, you have no idea. You're going to have traffic and child support and business meeting. You're not going to do any of that. No. You have to start that sort of habitual process while you're in here. And my point in bringing up those examples is because what I'm trying to tell them is that their character development is something they have to do on their own. There's no college class in it. There's no chapel class. Really focusing on it is something they have to do on their own. And it's probably the most important thing that is going to predict whether or not they're going to be successful in reentry. But the first thing you said was also really important. So just one of my sort of talking points, whoever wants to listen when I say it, is that education and these sort of things need to be introduced to people right from the beginning during their time. Because I think the model has been, recidivism is about people not coming back to prison and keeping the community safe. Never mind what goes on in the prison while you're there. But culture change inside the prison is going to spill out into the streets and help everybody's lives as well. So not allowing people with big time to enroll in these educational programs and just sort of putting them to the side until their last couple of years is such a massive waste.
Oh yeah, it's a missed opportunity. Yeah. It's a huge missed opportunity.
For everyone, for the staff shortages, like all of these things would be reduced so much if time were spent helping people when they got in there to develop their character. And the people who have big time is really the ones who are more situated to incite that sort of culture change because they have an interest in maintaining whatever norms are presently established. So anyway, that's the kind of thing that I know we could talk at length about. So that being the case, now you have a master's degree in criminal justice and you're teaching there. What are maybe some distinctive ideas or points you have about how criminal justice ought to be done?
Well, that's a good question. And what I have found in my experience is that TDCJ is a massive agency. In fact, in Texas, the state of Texas is the largest employer in the state of Texas, right? The state of Texas government is the largest agency within the state of Texas that employs people is the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I have found them, even for the size of an agency, to be extremely open-minded about working on how to better their prison system, right? And this has been, it's something I've wanted ever since I got out of prison in 2015. I wanted to work with TDCJ as a partner because we're married to each other for the rest of our lives. I'm on parole till 2073. So it's like I was telling one of the officials in TDCJ when I first got out, I want to work with y'all. We're married to each other for the rest of our lives. Let's make it a happy marriage. Yeah. And it took them a little while to because I'm sure they see so many people coming out and they have all these big ideas, these big plans. But once they saw that I was on this path and I was committed to it and I walked my talk, they said, hey, you know what? Yeah, you can be helpful to us. And man, that felt good for this agency where I once lived, where because of the mistakes I made, I had to go serve my time. It felt good for TDCJ to bring me back in and say, hey, let's work together. Let's do some things together. So first of all, I want to say that I've been extremely fortunate to be able to experience that end of working with one of the biggest prison systems in America. Yeah. To say, hey, how can we do things better, and what can you do to help? And so I found TDCJ to be a tremendous partner in trying to make prison better. And that's one of the things I want to do, Brandon. I want to find ways to make this better because I think and we'll talk about my foundation, what we're doing in a little while. But I think there's so much talent inside those prisons. And you know this and I know that, man. There's tremendous talent sitting there that if harnessed in the right way, these people could solve some of our societal ills.
Yeah.
You know? And if we harness that in the right way, if we took some of these people in prison, we harnessed it in the right way, we got them believing in themselves again. Because the four most important words for a human being to hear, I believe in you. I believe in you. That's the four most important words for a human being to hear. In fact, whenever I was in prison, I remember when I got this letter vividly. My favorite teacher growing up, Mr. Jellin, wrote me a letter. It was September 2nd, 2011 was the date on the letter. And I read this letter, and the letter basically said, Damon, you've been the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. But I think you'll turn this around because you've always been a leader and you've always found a way to bounce back. And when you do turn this around, I think you should consider sharing your story with young people, because I think you have a story to tell and you could bring them hope and you could bring them a warning. And I laid my bunk, Brandon. I thought, man, because Mr. Jellin said in the letter, I believe in you. I thought to myself, man, Mr. Jellin believes in me. My favorite teacher believes in me. A teacher told me that. And I believed it, man. And that was the seed that planted this tree and became a forest of this coffee bean movement going on right now. But, you know, just having someone believe in you is so much. And if we could find a way to show these men and women that are incarcerated that someone believes in them and that, hey, they could be a part of the solution out there, I think that's so valuable. And I think it's one of the things that's been missing in the world right now. Not everywhere, but I mean, in general, you say, hey, look, you got all this talent in prison, but so many people have had negative interactions with formerly incarcerated people. Mm-hmm. They just want to write everybody off. And it's what I tell every formerly incarcerated person. Sometimes parole brings me in to talk to the new boots that just come out of prison. And I tell them all the same thing. Everything you do, every interaction you have with anybody else out in society, that is either going to build a bridge for the next man or woman coming behind you out of prison, or it's going to blow it up. Because everybody's going to judge their interaction with you, how they see a former incarcerated person. So just know that it's bigger than you out there right now. And when I teach my class, Prisons in America, I try to teach this group of young people. I've got a chance to mold the next generation of criminal justice practitioners, whether they be people getting into corrections or people getting into law enforcement or social work, whatever. I've got a chance to mold them and show them an example of someone that has made some poor choices, deserved to go to prison, went to prison, did my time, and became the best version of myself possible inside those walls, and tell the stories of what corrections looks like from the side of it of one of us, a former incarcerated person. And so I think it's just really a unique opportunity after getting my master's in criminal justice in 2019 to be able to go teach and turn that into a career of being a teacher. Because I think we're all teachers, Brandon. We're either going to teach people how to do things the right way or the wrong way, but everybody's a teacher.
Yeah. Well, that resonates with me because one of the main motivations for my own calling in life is when I was still in prison in 2002, my grandmother was the one who would send me books and scour the internet, and try to print stuff out and send it to me. And I realized that not everybody had a grandmother, who would do that sort of a thing. And the literature that floated around, some of it was racist, conspiracy theories, the propaganda. And that's all people had access to, and so they ate it up and they believed it. And I only had an 8-year sentence, but I saw these guys who had life in 50 years, and I just thought, look at the potential. If someone like myself could be like my grandmother, I could just provide them with the quality resources, the education, something worthwhile, something substantive. Look at the potential of these people in here who are either naturally or forced to be resourceful and creative and innovative because of their environment and what they have to deal with. But just look at that potential that could be used as long as somebody helped sort of facilitate it in the right way. And so I do see this massive potential that is just sort of wasted by people who are like, I got 50 years. Nothing really is going to benefit me until those last 10. So I'm just going to watch TV and gamble and mess around.
Or I'm going to get into a wreck everywhere I can for the first 15 years before I don't see parole until 30 on a life, right? So first 15 years, I'm going to go out and screw up and see every part of the prison system that you see when you get in trouble, and I'll clean it up for the last 15 years. Well, dude, if I'm going to encounter you in the first 15 years, that sucks for me.
Yep.
Let's try to make this the best experience possible.
Yeah. So there's a huge amount of potential there, and it sounds like some other things you've said is. That when it comes to our society and the way that we view punishment, going to prison is the punishment. all of this other stuff that we associate or just assume is part of the game, like the violence and food deprivation and, you know, not having your
quality food.
All of that stuff is not supposed to be a part of the, you know, the punishment. It's the separation from society and family and whatnot. And so it sounds like some of your views on criminal justice fit into broadly like restorative models and rehabilitative models with a very clear picture of the retribution part. It's the isolation from society that is the punishment.
I think that when I talk about criminal justice reform, I think when I hear, first of all, when I hear someone say criminal justice reform, I think most people are talking about criminal justice before prison. Prison is a depository. It's a place where you deposit people, man. That's where you go whenever you made your mistakes. Now there's some legitimate reform that needs to be done inside the prisons. But I think when most people talk about criminal justice reform, they're talking about all the stuff in the criminal justice system before prison. And we're talking about the judiciary, the policing, whatever. Those are things that I think most people, when they say criminal justice reform, that's what I think most people are talking about. What I've tried to stay away from in my life is criminal justice reform movements that are against something. You know, somebody says, "Hey, we're against the police," or "We're against corrections." I don't want to be part of that, because I'm telling you why I don't want to be part of that is I want to be for something that's good. I look at things in a positive way. I try to see things as a glass half full. So what am I going to be for? Not so much what I'm going to be against, because the being against crowd, now you've cut yourself off from a population that could be useful to you. You know, with what I'm doing in Louisiana, you know, if I went into that with a mindset of I'm against corrections, you know, there's no way I would find a state correction agency that would say, "Hey, let's do this program inside our prison." But I went in there and said, "Hey, man, I've been inside of a prison. I used to live inside of a prison. Here's some things I think we could do. And here's an idea. Here's a program. Can we do this inside your prison system?" And so, yeah, I mean, I think being for something is always better than being against something if you can.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a large movement of critics of corrections and police, but that's the part where it ends. They often have good things to say. They have, you know, sometimes an appropriate analysis of what's wrong, but there's nothing to replace it with, well, what should we do better? It's just an endless cycle of critique and cynicism and nothing positive to replace it. And you're right. I've spoken at conferences where I try to stress to those who are sort of critically minded or activist minded that that's not going to be very favorable to the corrections. And so the very people that you are trying to help, you're being prevented from reaching them because of your own sort of personal cynicism or resentment or whatever. And you just need to keep that to yourself if what you're really doing this for is to help someone else as opposed to maybe your own
ego. Is it about you? Is it about them? You know, if it's really about them, then you got to bite your tongue and just roll with it.
That's right. Whatever you got to do to genuinely reach out and try to help somebody else, you know, unless you just want to be on TV for.
No, I agree. I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, you really find out what people are made of, because then they're given this chance, this platform to do something and have an impact in society. And that's what I wanted. When I was being interviewed for parole, the lady from parole asked me, she said, "If you could be remembered for being anything at all, anything, give it to me just one word." And it was useful.
Useful, yeah.
A word was useful, because that's what be useful, Brandon. I mean, and I think so many people that are incarcerated, by the way, want to be useful. And I think there's more correctional officers out there that view prison the same way we view it than are ever being talked about, because they see it, man. These COs, when they're walking around their pods, are doing, they're doing cell checks, they're doing, they're doing counts, whatever it is they're doing, they're around. They're locked up for 12 hours a day, pretty much, man. They see the potential there too. In fact, I had a warden. It's in my book, The Change Agent, the warden that pulls me out of solitary after that fight, gives me a minimum punishment, gives me minor punishment because they lost me in solitary. Didn't think I deserved to be there that long. Then he gives me that job in unit supply and tells me I need you to clean up unit supply. And if you can do this job right, parole will see a reformed thief that was in the most tempting spot on the unit to steal from, but cleaned his act up. And it did. This guy gave me an opportunity. And I remember having a conversation with him one time in prison, and he was telling me, we're walking by the rec yard, and he said, "Look at all this talent out here." He said, but most of these guys will never get a second chance. They'll never get a chance to use their talent, use their gifts. That warden today I introduced him to a friend of mine named Sherry Garcia. And you know Sherry.
Yeah.
Sherry has Cornbread Hustle.
Yeah.
Sherry called me up back in like April. And she said, Damon, I need help. I need to find somebody to be my operations person that runs this whole thing. I just need some help. I'm overwhelmed. And it's someone that's going to be around formerly incarcerated people. And she's got the Second Chance Staffing Agency.
Yeah.
Well, just a week before that, my friend Darren Wallace, the former warden from TDCJ that was in the book, who's now retired, who lives down the road from me, he calls me up, and he's a substitute teacher at a middle school in Port Neches. And he said, hey, man, I'm bored. I'm looking for something to get into. I don't want to go back into corrections. If you hear of anything, let me know. And I was like, Sherry, let me introduce you to somebody, because it sounds like you need a warden to run your business. And today, Darren Wallace is the operations person for Cornbread Hustle.
Yeah.
He's the warden again, but he's in a place where he can now help those people that he saw, that he said to me in prison, look at all this talent. Now he can actually harness that talent, find that talent, a home or a place to work. And that's it, man. That's what better way is it than to be that useful, you know?
Yeah. This is one area where many times Texas has this reputation of being, you know, the tough on crime conservatives, and they're not trying to hear about progress and reform, which is interesting because Texas has had college level education in the system since the 60s. Some of the longest running educational programs in the nation. But in saying that, I was thinking about what you said about, you think there are a lot of people in TDCJ who are really trying to change and they're open to new ways of doing things. And I've seen that myself. So in 2011, I became a contract employee with TDCJ under the guise of teaching with the seminary. And I had not heard of anyone else doing that. And so the fact that they were even open to that, and I could walk on the Darrington unit with a set of keys, and it was just so surreal and weird. But ever since then, I have noticed more and more just openness to new ideas. A lot of the field ministry seminary program is an indication of that. What they're doing working with you is also an indication of that. And I think part of it is whatever people think about the causes or the definition of mass incarceration, just the brute fact of the matter is that, like, quantitatively, so many people have been affected in some way by the prison system that you have wardens who has a brother in prison, right? Or family who's strung out on drugs. And so it's not as if inmates are foreign or exotic people.
Right.
They're just people who are like, you know, my cousin Joe was locked up. And so maybe in a different way than the 70s or the 80s, where not a lot of people had experience with someone who had been locked up because of mass incarceration, regardless of the causes or definition. Everybody knows somebody that's been to prison, and they know that people going to prison or who have served time in prison aren't the monster that they're made out to be. And so I think a lot of that is also what motivates the push for change, because we've just all had this radically different view about incarceration in the last couple of decades.
And I think so much of that has to do with substance abuse. And I tell people that substance abuse affects every person in this country, whether you're the addict going through it, the family member or the friend of an addict that's going through it, the victim the addict creates because they commit crimes and violate people to get in their pursuit of getting high. Or you're the taxpayer paying into an overburdened criminal justice system that has no idea how to accurately handle the disease of addiction. Addiction affects everybody in this country. And once we start understanding that, because addiction, drugs is the main reason why we have an over-incarceration problem in America. This, in my opinion, it stems back to drug-related offenses, right? Because that's what we have. So we have a lot of people that are addicts that are locked up. Now, the onus is upon the addict to want to seek the change while they're in prison, or before they get there. The addict has to get a program of recovery, in my opinion. And how do you do that? You can't force someone into doing that. But I think that seeing stuff like you're talking about, seeing like the Texas Department of Criminal Justice being more open to working with people that are formerly incarcerated because they're examples. You know, I think that I can look back at all the times that a formerly incarcerated person came into the Styles unit to talk to us in the chapel. A chapel program is usually where you'd see these guys. Yeah. But man, everybody in the room is locked in and listening to that guy talking. And it doesn't matter if he's a white guy, there's black guys in the audience, whatever. Race, it's just this message that this person was bringing transcended race, which is such a big factor in prison. Yeah. But everybody wants what that guy's got. Yeah. And they want to hear how he did it, how you hold on to it. And now guys like you and I get to be that person, but we wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for TDCJ letting us back in.
Right.
And I think that that's going to be one of the ways that we change the way prisons work in America, is when you have people that are this heavily invested to incarceration back into the system, changing the system. Because I think that we hold a lot of the currency to make that happen. We have this unique currency to spend with the incarcerated, but we have to have people that allow us to spend that. And so that's one thing I think TDCJ is. There's a lot of things to do well, but they're definitely innovative in that. And let me tell you this, what I've learned from other states. Other states copy Texas.
Yes, they do.
The Texas model, the stuff that goes on inside Texas prisons, I have found, because I've talked to prison directors all over America, they brought me into their prisons. They do what Texas does. Texas does something, and other people say, hey, that works from Texas, let's do it here.
Yep. Yeah, I have that on my mind, as I work and when I'm in the system. I'm not only being looked up to from the people serving time, but I'm being looked at by TDCJ and the authorities to see, whether or not I'm genuine about what I'm trying to do. And so, when I teach classes, I don't play at all. I let them know off the top, like, I'm in here, for your benefit. I'm not playing any games with you. Don't even approach me like that, because what I do has a lot of bearing on, the image that others have about people coming out of prison and what we can do with our lives. So obviously you've done an enormous amount in just this few short years. I've been out 16 years. I haven't accomplished as much as you. You're doing amazing things. Most people know about the coffee bean and the change agent, but if you could tell me some of the things you're doing with your foundation and some things for children of the incarcerated and some of those other issues.
Yeah, so I have this foundation called the Be a Coffee Bean Foundation, and the coffee bean analogy is an allegory, really. Pot of boiling water. You put 3 things in the pot of boiling water, and watch the change that happens. A carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. The carrot in the pot of boiling water becomes soft. When you boil a carrot, it becomes soft, and that's the imagery is of people that go into life, and life is difficult. It beats them down, makes them soft and sad and weak. And which, by the way, I have carrot days all the time. Being sad is a normal, human emotion. Then the egg goes into the pot of boiling water and becomes hard. And that's what happens in life. Life beats us down, makes us hard, bitter, and angry, and mean, and irritable. And I have a lot of egg days, to be honest with you. I'm an egg too sometimes. But the coffee bean changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. It's the only thing that could change the water, the 3 things. Everything else was changed by the water. But the coffee bean changes the water because the power is inside the coffee bean. It gets unlocked by that adversity, that boiling water. And I think every one of us has that power inside of us to change our pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. And it was this allegory that was given to me by a black man in Dallas County Jail, a black man who I still can't find to this day. He went by the name Muhammad.
Yep, I remember that.
But I can't find him to this day. But he gives me this allegory to send me on my way into this prison system that he thinks is probably going to devour me, because that's what it does to most people. Because he's telling me about the racial factor in there and what I'm up against. I want to be an independent, but I'm going to have to fight the white gangs and the black gangs. And, the life in this building where I'm going is one of the toughest parts of prison. And he was right about all that. I mean, he was right about everything. But this black man was a teacher in my life. And, I've spent time trying to find this man since I've been out of prison. This man that showed me the coffee bean, that gave me the coffee bean. But I can't find him. So I thought to myself, if I can't find him, I'm going to go find more of him. Brandon, I learned so much about race when I was in prison. I learned about racism when I was in prison, because definitions are important. In order for racism to exist, there has to be an imbalance of power. That means one race has more power over other races. That race can write laws to affect where those other races live, where they go to school, the kind of schools they go to, the kind of America they live in. And in America, I have found white people have that power in society. And that's what racism is. Now, when a white friend tells me, hey, Damon, that person of color was being racist or saying something racist, I help my friend out, because definitions are important. What my white friend is talking about is prejudice. And prejudice looks like racism, but it doesn't have the power component to it. Prejudice means to prejudge. And you know what? White people can definitely feel racism. White people can definitely feel prejudice. But it's very difficult for a white person in America to ever say they've experienced racism, because racism is about power. They can experience prejudice, but experiencing racism, well, that's really a uniquely white thing. White people have the power. But you have experienced racism before. You lived in a world, I lived in a world where being white was no longer the advantage. With the color of your skin, It meant that you couldn't sit on a certain row of benches in the day room, or you could get your face kicked in the rec yard simply because of the color of your skin. So I got to, as a white person, live in a world where I got to experience racism for the first time. And I understood racism. And I also understood some things about it, is that, you know, when you talk about racism, it's impossible to talk about that without talking about the cancel culture. Because if you're going to talk about ending racism, you got to talk about ending the cancel culture too, because that's what's going to prohibit a lot of people that look like you, people that look like me, from getting involved in the conversation about racism. Because, well, there's two reasons why it's very difficult for white people right now to get in this conversation. One is that, well, most white people have never experienced racism before. And two, most white people are scared to death to even talk about it. Because if I say or do the wrong thing in this conversation, I could lose everything in the process. Yeah. And if you're a white person in America, the safest play for you right now is sit back and be quiet, let the protests and the riots stop, because they will. But that doesn't change anything. So my philosophy in life is that, hey, let's change this. Let's work on both these problems. So racism, if we're going to fix racism, let's talk about what white people need to do. White people are going to have, people look like you and me, we're going to have to get educated here. That means we're going to have to start listening to what black and brown people are telling us about racism. That means that's going to take a lot of humility on the part of a lot of white people to just sit there and listen and absorb and learn and go out there and proactively find and understand this topic more. Now, it takes humility on white people's part. Black people are going to have to invite these white people that are willing to listen and learn. They're going to have to invite them into these conversations with grace. Grace. Now, when grace is present, that means that you may not say or do the right thing, but that's okay. You're not going to lose everything in the process when grace is present, because grace means that you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach. And grace is such a hard deal, because grace always costs the person giving it more than it costs the person receiving it. But when you have humility and grace, there's no room for racism or a cancel culture. Now, I've had to apply this in my life, and I gave you all that to let you know that since I've been out, and I've had this success in life, and I've been able to take this coffee bean message to the next level, I've listened to what my black friends are telling me about racism in America. And they're like, yeah, it is about the imbalance of power. And what we need is for white people to transfer some of that power back to us. But we don't necessarily need you standing over our shoulders the entire time. Transfer some of that power back to our communities and let us fix our own communities. So I listened and I said, all right, I'm going to find a way to do that. And I did. So I learned this fact. Less than 2% of the teachers in America are black men. Less than 2% of the teachers in America are black men. Now think about it, man. Think about school systems, teachers that are black. Most of the time you see a lot of coaches that are black, but you don't see a lot of teachers that are black men. And I saw a study, a Johns Hopkins study, Brandon, said that if a black boy is a black male teacher between 2nd and 5th grade, I mean, that boy is 40%, probably like 40% more likely to graduate high school. He's more likely to become a teacher one day, because he's seen that it can be done. He sees himself inside that teacher. And when I heard this number that less than 2% of the teachers in America are black men, I thought to myself, well, I know a place for half the population is black men. Prison and education. Now we're back to education again. So my plan was to find a state prison system in America that will allow me to go into the prison, find incarcerated black men, and these guys would have the kind of criminal offenses. You could still be a teacher, because every state allows certain felons to be a teacher. They wouldn't have a lot of time on their sentence, about 4 years to get a college degree while they're in there. Yeah. And they had the aptitude to test into college. And if I could find a prison system to do that, we would take them and transfer these guys to one prison, just like you do in the seminary, just like you do in Texas with the Darrington unit. Yeah. Bring these guys to one unit, let the university come in there, and for 4 years, these guys get an education degree from a university. And when they graduate, my foundation, to be a Coffee Bean Foundation, we've just paid for their education. Now we're there waiting for them. And I tell people all the time, landmines are only dangerous if you don't know where they are, Brandon. So I know where the minefield is on re-entry. I'll grab each one of these guys by the hand and walk them through that minefield. Here's a used car that's been donated to you. Here's a wardrobe for you to teach in. Here's a home for the first year, a place for you to live. All your living needs are taken care of. Here is your first year student teacher's salary. All these needs are met. Now, your job, now that you have all these re-entry tools that you need to get through, your job is to go out there and be an elementary school teacher in the toughest elementary school in that state. Title I, underperforming, at-risk, majority black school. Because you are a positive black male role model, we're going to stick you in that pot of boiling water that we call public education. And we call this initiative the Mr. Coffee Bean Initiative. Because now we're taking a guy that's been in prison, that's earned a second chance, and he's going to go out there and be that pre-intervention for that kid that needs it in that elementary school. And Brandon, think about it, man. What better guy to pull a kid aside in the hallway and say, hey, son, let me tell you about the choices you're making in life. Let me tell you my story. And this is a black man talking to a black boy. He's got penetration into a system that you and I can't get into necessarily because race is such an overriding factor. But now we've empowered this black man with an education and all the tools he needs to get by. Now he can go in there and fix his own community. We've empowered this man. But I had to find a state that would let me do it. So I went to Texas first. And Texas was like, sounds like a great idea, but we're just not ready. We're not there yet. So I went to the next state over, Louisiana. The Secretary of Corrections there is a guy named Jimmy LeBlanc. And a guy I know well because I've gone to their system a lot, talked to their inmates. And we pitched him the idea in February. Said, hey, Jimmy, what if we did this in your prison? We could find 5 incarcerated black men. We'll take them and we'll move them to one facility, the Hunt facility, right outside of Baton Rouge, close to your prison headquarters. We can keep an eye on everything. We'll bring a university in, McNeese State University, and we'll bring them in there to get these guys 4-year degrees from McNeese. And when they parole out, we'll stick them in the toughest elementary school. Maybe it's Lake Charles, maybe it's New Orleans, maybe it's East Baton Rouge Parish. Well, we'll stick them in those toughest elementary schools and watch these guys go. No cost to the taxpayer. None to the taxpayer. Jimmy said, we're in. No one in the history of incarceration has ever done a program like this, but Jimmy said, we are in. We want to be first. The governor got behind it. Everybody got behind it. And all the pieces just fell into place. And Brandon, to this date, we have picked 2. We're going to have a 5-man cohort. We've already picked 2 of our guys. They're on the Hunt facility right now in St. Gabriel Parish. And in January, these guys start classes. They become our Mr. Coffee Beans. And it's Mr. because they put the salutation of Mr. in front of them because one day they're going to be a teacher. They're going to be Mr. So-and-so, you know? And that's one of our initiatives that we're doing. That's one way I've listened to what black and brown people have told me. Hey, empower us, but get away, don't necessarily hang out over our shoulders when you do that. Let us fix our own community. And I tell people all the time, the tagline for this thing is taking the school to prison pipeline and reversing it, making it the prison to school pipeline. Now we're going to take those guys, and we talked about at the beginning, we're coming full circle in this conversation, how much talent is sitting around those prisons. Yep. There are elementary school teachers inside our prison, Brandon. You know this, I know this. There are men that can go out and change their environments because of the mistakes that they've made and the price they've had to pay. They can be a role model to these kids. You're doing it in life, I'm doing it in life, but we need to empower more people to do it in life. So the other program that we have at the Be a Coffee Bean Foundation we call it Coffee Bean Cares, and Cares is an acronym. Cultivating activities and relationships through extracurricular scholarships. What this means is like these men that I was locked up with in prison, they get off the phones with their families or they get a letter from their families and they're just a heap of tears. They're a mess. They're crying. And I'm like, man, what's wrong? You okay? And it's always the same story. Man, my son or my daughter wants to do this. We can't afford it. I'm in prison or my family's falling apart and I'm in here. What am I going to do? I can't do anything for them. So what I want to do is I want to find boys and girls that have incarcerated parents. And we're going to start in this area of Texas where we live in Southeast Texas. We're going to find children of incarcerated parents. This child has to have at least one incarcerated parent. And I want the incarcerated parent to nominate their child for an extracurricular scholarship. Say the little girl wants to take dance or the little boy wants to take karate or places like baseball, whatever. That stuff's expensive. Yeah. Our foundation, we get the nomination form in. We call the family member, the guardian that takes care of the kid on the outside, whether it's the ex-wife, the wife, grandmother, whoever it is, said, hey, this child's been nominated for a scholarship. We'll pay for everything. Would dropping another activity in your life change your life in a bad way? Like if you're working 3 jobs, the last thing you want to do is drop soccer practice in there. Yeah, it's tough. But we want to know if it's not going to change your life in a negative way, we'll help you out with ride shares and everything. We'll pay for all the costs, all the equipment, every necessity that has to be done with this. But we want to end the cycle of incarceration because it's a cycle. Children of incarcerated parents are more likely to become incarcerated themselves. A couple of reasons why I think that's so. One is the generational incarceration that goes on, but 2, it's the breakdown of that parent-child relationship. What I'm trying to do with this foundation is mend that parent-child relationship. Because now that parent that's incarcerated, that man or woman that's incarcerated, can talk to their kid on the phone or talk to their kid in letters or a visitation and say, hey, how's that dance going that I got you? How's that scholarship that I got you going? How's that activity going? How's baseball going? now they got something to talk about, Brandon. Now they're healing their relationship, and that kid is involved with something. I mean, if we can have it our way, if we can raise the money to do it, which we're doing right now, we like to get a kid that's 9 or 10 years old, got a parent that's going to be down for a while and say, hey, we'll do this till you're 18.
Yeah.
Find something you like, find an activity you like. Let's keep you involved so you don't get one of those numbers like your parent did. So that's what we're doing now.
Yeah, so I think it's a great initiative, especially in the sense that you thought about the schedules of the parents or the guardians and whether or not adding some sort of extracurricular activity would be beneficial or not, because that's something that we have to think about logistically. It's a great thing, but is it going to burden the family in a way we had not anticipated? So that kind of insight is really uncanny on your part. So yeah, you've accomplished so much in the last few years. I'm just excited to have met you, and I met you at the Heart of Texas banquet.
Yeah, Heart of Texas banquet. Yeah.
And someone had said, do you know this guy? I said no, but I heard of him, wanted to meet you, and then I didn't get to follow up with you. And then you met Johnny Ward, and Johnny Ward and I were talking, and then come full circle, and you were talking to Mark Staley. So I was like, all right, I got to get with this.
Yeah, we got to do this, man.
Yeah.
But the timing was right. God's timing is perfect. I call it God's time. You call it whatever you want, but I mean, that timing is perfect, man.
Yeah.
So it's finally happening.
Yeah, so I just hope to be able to encourage you in different ways to continue the work that you're doing. Just the opportunity for people incarcerated to nominate their kids is something I shared, and that's something I can share on the inside when I go in and teach as well. So, I just want to support you in whatever ways I can. But
yeah, and Brandon, I want to tell you, I appreciate the opportunity to do this with you today because I look up to you. I do. You're a guy that got out of prison. You didn't let it hold you back. You went out and you made some clear choices to put in the work, and you went out and got your EDD. And you became a professor. You became a teacher, because we're all teachers. We can teach people how to do it the right way, the wrong way. But I look up to you because you've done something even beyond what I've been able to do education-wise. And but I thought it was important for us, if we're going to have this conversation today, to talk about that factor of racism. Because here we are, 2 white guys that have been in the system, got out, and highly educated. You're educated at the highest level. I'm at the second highest level with a master's degree. We're out there doing things that not a lot of other people have been able to do, but we also need to acknowledge race as a factor because we are white men that have been, into the system and come out, and we have the ability to transfer some of that power back. So that's why I wanted to talk about the race thing in this conversation today, because we're going to talk about incarceration, we're going to talk about education. We have to talk about race and how to empower, other races back. And I think it's great what you're doing out there. And I appreciate all the support you give to what I'm doing out there too. If there's everything I can do to support you, brother, let me know, man.
All right. Thanks.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.